In strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi. On the gist today, our guest is Ambassador Vivek Katju, India's former envoy to Afghanistan. Ambassador Katju, welcome back to StratNews Global after a while, sir.
Thank you.
Ambassador, you've been telling us since, I think, 2017 and on every other platform that you've written or appeared on, that it would be inevitable that India would have to talk to the Taliban, and that engagement is not recognition. Now, it's been building up in terms of the first publicly announced official delegation to Kabul since the takeover. Would you say it's a major move or significant step?
Well, it is obviously a significant step because to send a delegation openly to Kabul to meet with the Taliban leadership and J.P. Singh, the Joint Secretary, PAI in External Affairs, who is very well versed with affairs relating to India's western neighborhood, led this team, and he met with the acting foreign minister, the acting deputy foreign minister, and others, I would imagine, which has not been, at least I haven't seen publicly. But that shows that it was a well thought out move. The only question in my mind is that whether it is part of a process that we will now set in place. I very much hope that it will be, because otherwise the standalone visit like this makes little sense.
We can talk about that in a little more detail in a short while, Ambassador. But how does India deal with the Taliban, and especially, you didn't mention him, but the acting Interior Minister Sirajuddin Haqqani, a designated terrorist, one who's responsible for many attacks on India's interests, including the embassy bombing that killed Brigadier Mehta, Councillor Venkateshwar Rao, and 2 ITBP personnel.
I don't think anyone will like dealing with it. But realism demands that you deal with whoever is a de facto ruler in Afghanistan. After all, have we not dealt with the Pakistanis, who at least for the last 30 years have been responsible for sponsoring terrorism against India in J&K and elsewhere, who have killed thousands and thousands of Indians, who were responsible for Mumbai? Did that deter us from dealing with them? We don't have high commissioners in either Islamabad or in Delhi, but we have our missions open. So I think this argument is a very facile argument, that how do we deal with this man? We deal with Pakistani leaders who have blood on their hands as far as Indians are concerned.
You were talking about you hope that this was a process and not just a standalone visit, and I presume that that's what's going to happen. Do you see it, like calibrated responses from India? Do you see it moving towards us having a presence of some sorts in Kabul, consular, if not at the ambassador level?
No. Look, there's no question of diplomatically recognizing the Taliban. No. That has to be done by the international community as a whole. The countries that recognized the Taliban in the 1990s, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, they too have not recognized the Taliban diplomatically, nor have the Chinese or the Russians. But that has not prevented either these countries or other countries from dealing with them. And many of the Gulf states and others, I think the Chinese and the Russians included, have a presence in Afghanistan. So I don't see anything wrong with our having a presence. In fact, I've been advocating that we need a presence in Afghanistan. Yes, we'll need to ensure that there is security for our personnel in Afghanistan, and that is something that we will uh, have to be particularly careful about. But I do believe that we can have mechanisms, including mechanisms which derive from Pashtun tradition, which will give us comfort when it comes to the security of our people. And that is also an issue which we can discuss with the Taliban and say that, look, we need people who will our own security personnel. These are things that can be part of negotiations in establishing a presence.
We saw those pictures and tweets of the recent UN report, which talked about affiliation of other terrorist groups with the Taliban. Of course, we know about Al Qaeda, but specifically about India targeting groups like the Jaish-e-Mohammed and Lashkar-e-Taiba still being under Taliban control. So, would you see this process involving at some point of time us discussing these kind of issues?
Of course, when we are there, we will discuss our security concerns and sensitize them to our security concerns. Now, I don't expect that there'll be a magic wand there that you sensitize them and everything. But again, I go back to the Pakistan analogy. These are Pakistani groups. Who controls them? We know who controls them. Who sponsors them? Who finances them? Who instigates them? Now, it's the Pakistanis. And have we not been dealing with them? So I find these arguments very facile. That we will not deal with the Taliban because they have connections with these fellows, but we will continue to deal with the Pakistanis on whose territory, not only on whose territory they are, but these fellows are Pakistani nationals. There has to be some consistency here.
Well, since you're talking about influence, control, what is your reading of the Taliban's situation vis-a-vis Pakistan? I mean, one of the statements I do remember, that's after JP Singh led delegation's visit there. They talked about bilateral ties or ties between India and Afghanistan not being affected by third countries.
Yes, I noted that, and in fact, I wrote an article which was carried by one of the papers today on this engagement, where I put it in. Now, clearly, there is a long-standing relationship between the Taliban and Pakistan. The Pakistan has supported them in times of their need. They have deep connections. Families have resided there, etc. But given all that, I do believe that there are certain inherent contradictions that are present in situations relating to Kabul and Islamabad. And that it is inevitable that in time these contradictions come to the fore. And they lead to complications. Also, it is my belief that that the Taliban is not a monolith. There are sections between them, there are contradictions between them. We know that there are ethnic contradictions, tribal contradictions, there are regional contradictions, etc. So the connections with the Taliban groups, and I'm using, or I should use the word subgroup, with the Pakistanis vary. Some want more intense contact, some want less contact, etc. But I do think that all of them would also want to open up their options. And in opening up their options, India is a major country. So, while we should not take anything that the Taliban say at face value, we should judge them by their actions. But we should take note of what they are saying. After all, it is known that when it came to the supply of Indian wheat to Afghanistan, Mutaqi and I would think other Taliban leaders told the Pakistanis that Afghanistan needs this wheat and let it go. And I also recollect that in 2002 the situation was totally different. In 2002 at the Tokyo conference, India had pledged 1,000,000 tons of wheat. It's no secret, I'll share it with you, that the question was, how do we send this wheat? It was horrendously expensive to send it via the sea route to Bandar Abbas, to Chabahar, and then overland into Afghanistan. So at that stage, Karzai, who was then the leader of Afghanistan, approached General Musharraf and said, let this wheat come to us, we need it desperately. And the Pakistanis said no. Why? Because they raised phytosanitary concerns. They said Indian wheat has a fungus called Karnal bunt. Now, there is that fungus, which is well known. It's in Pakistani wheat too, and it's totally harmless to humans. We all eat that wheat. Nothing goes wrong with us. But that was the excuse. But this time around, when the Taliban raised it, they didn't say no. And I believe about 15 to 17,000 tons of wheat has gone via Pakistan into Afghanistan. So the Taliban too know where the interests lie in a manner.
And it's wheat, it's COVID vaccines, medicines,
That's right.
winter clothing
That's right.
that we've provided. To continue doing that, which is one of the pillars of Indian foreign policy for the Afghan people, you still have to deal with the Taliban.
Naturally, you can do it via international agencies, and that's right. But you have to deal with the Taliban, and all this talk that look, we are only dealing with the people of Afghanistan with whom we have historic and civilizational ties, etc., is true. Then at the moment, the de facto rulers of Afghanistan are the Taliban. And in supplying this assistance, you have to deal with them. So let's not kid ourselves. In this engagement can not only be to say that we are doing it only for humanitarian reasons, etc. It has to be a political process. There's nothing wrong with it. After all, India is in the Indian the government is in the business of safeguarding and promoting India's national interests. And if our national interests demand dealing with an entity, we should deal with it without hesitation.
Now, how much influence you have in terms of changing or influencing Taliban policies is a different matter. But how would you see the fact that one of the members of the delegation that JP Singh led there, Deepti Jarwal, the DS in the PI division, is maybe a symbolic move, but how would you see that, considering what's happening with women in Afghanistan? Is that free Afghan women, free Afghan faces movement that is also, at least on social media?
I think it was good that she's an official in India, and we should never be reluctant to taking officials, irrespective of their gender. That's our right. We will not be dictated by any other country or any other entity about who will be a member of our delegation. And if restrictions are put, then I do believe the proper course is not to go. No one can dictate to us how we will conduct our own internal management. No one should. We are a sovereign country. That's how sovereign countries behave. But it's a fact that the Taliban too did not raise, as far as I can see, any concerns. She was part of the delegation. And she was in meetings, etc. And the only thing in such situations is that you dress, whether it is for males or females, that you dress in a manner that will be comforting to your hosts. After all, that is what is etiquette. Just as we will expect if anyone coming to India will not offend our sensibilities when it comes to dress, so we should also be the same. And I can see that from the photographs that quite clearly that we were sensitive. So it's fine.
Sure, absolutely. And the only interesting thing I found in the Taliban official social media releases, at least, was that she was cut off in the pictures that they released. But that apart, if there is incremental movement with India dealing with the Taliban, I mean, as you said, it will depend on their actions. But say there is some consular presence next. We saw JP Singh going to various Indian projects, whether it's Habibia School, whether it's the Chimtal Pa station as well. How do you see India's previous development aid, which again the Taliban would definitely hope would be forthcoming again? How do you see that movement? What should that depend on?
I think that should depend on a variety of factors, including security of of personnel who are delivering that aid. Uh, but all that would require a presence, and therefore, I, for one, have been advocating that we should have a presence ever since the change took place. Just as I've been arguing, and I think you noted that in your introduction, arguing since early 2017 that we should talk to the Taliban because I mean, I don't claim any prescience, I don't claim any acute knowledge of uh, men and events. I'm a retired diplomat, I only have access to information which is really available. But since I have a little background of Afghanistan, dealing with it, knowing some people there, leaders, I was seeing that there was no alternative but to our dealing with that. So I was saying that let's talk. And the whole world was talking to them. So it baffled me at that stage that why should we restrict ourselves and deny ourselves what everyone else is doing? But for some strange reason, we were not doing.
Now that this step has been taken, how do we deal with the erstwhile Republican partners that we have, Islamic Republican partners, or mid-level personnel who are still in Afghanistan in various institutions, people who have left, students, medical tourists? How do we deal with them? Many of whom feel extremely abandoned, if I can say that.
Uh, I think we should never have any reluctance with dealing with people we have dealt with in the past. That is point one. No one can demand of us that you don't deal with so and so, you don't deal with this X, Y, and Z. That's our business. So, one, we should deal with them, we should be in contact with them. Knowing full well that at this time, the chances of any successful resistance is very, very minimal. The objective factors will not permit. Second, I think that subject to careful scrutiny in line with our security requirements, we should permit Afghans to come to India for education, especially those Afghans who were in the middle of their education. You mentioned that they feel let down, and I can see that they would feel let down if supposing there are students who completed who were midway through their education in our colleges and universities and other institutions, and now suddenly find that the doors are closed to them. Naturally, they'll be missed. Second, medical tourism. It's an old tradition of Afghans coming to India for medical tourist purposes. Here again, we can scrutinize it all carefully, and I do believe that our officials have the wherewithal to segregate the and segregate people and ensure that only those who are bona fide come to India with bona fide requirements. But certainly that process should not stop. And at the moment, it seems to be interrupted, and that interruption must go.
Ambassador, just taking some questions and comments from our viewers for you. Sunil KS, who says, recently India had attended the Dushanbe Regional Security Dialogue and called for an inclusive government in Afghanistan. Sir, can you explain the significance of this dialogue? I mean, there was a Delhi Declaration before that.
Look, what is an inclusive government? Let's first agree on a definition of what is inclusive. Inclusive government, if by that we mean that there should be a resurrection of what was in the US Taliban agreement, that seems to be dead and gone. Because that was premised on the Taliban and the Kabul elite, as I call them, which is the Republic, the elite of the Republic, coming to an understanding. Unfortunately, the Republic collapsed. And once the Republic collapsed and the Taliban took over, even with force, they took over. Then, is it feasible to expect that they will form a government with those who they have, quote unquote, I'm using it in the largest sense, those they have defeated? I have not known a situation where a government is inclusive government is formed on this basis. Now, second, if it is believed that the Taliban that inclusive government means a government with various ideologies, people with various ideologies coming together, then that I think again is not feasible because the Taliban have an ideology. And they made it very plain, since whether we like it, the international community likes it or not, they made it very plain that they are more or less sticking to their ideology. And reports are that those among them who are more aware of the world are trying to moderate positions of the Taliban on gender, on minorities, and human rights, and making them more aligned to international norms. But that might take time. So when it comes to ideologies, naturally the Taliban would want their ideology to prevail. And that is what happens even in democratic countries where a party wins an election that comes to power on a certain ideology or a certain program of action, etc. Now, if by inclusive government we mean that it must contain all the ethnicities, I think that's a valid proposition. That Afghanistan can no longer be dominated by the Pashtuns as it has been since 1747 when Amitabh established his rule and the present Afghanistan sort of the process of the formation of present Afghanistan began. So I think there has to be a greater accommodation on the part of the Taliban. And lastly, if by inclusive government we mean that the Taliban should take technocrats and bureaucrats who are efficient, irrespective of their ethnicity and their ideology. I think the Taliban would be very foolish not to do this. But that's something which we'll have to see whether it happens or not.
Sure. We've seen reports of revenge killings, whether ethnic based or whether it's old regime, the Islamic Republic. Just this question from Noman Sheikh, Ambassador. The Taliban recruiting Uzbek, Tajik, Hazara fighters is rare. What do you have to say about that?
Yes, it is, because the Taliban are essentially a Pashtun force. And therefore, they are wary of including other ethnicities, and I think that's wrong. In time, they should, they should open up even now. That is why I said if it is multi-ethnic, yes. There, it will be prudent if they are reaching out to other ethnicities. But will that happen soon? That I think remains to be seen, because the Taliban, the Pashtun Taliban, have enormous contradictions among themselves. After all, we know that the Pashtuns are not a cohesive ethnicity. There are regional contradictions among them. There are tribal contradictions among them. There are theological contradictions among them, even though there's the umbrella of the Taliban theology. So they need to settle that too.
You talked briefly about Pakistan and the deep state and its role in Afghanistan, its history with Afghanistan. Do you see any possibility of any kind of different approach that Pakistan would have, because there's no Imran Khan and there's Shehbaz Sharif, or is there entrenched Afghan policy in GHQ?
Look, I think it's the GHQ which makes these policies. Neighborhood policies are not made by civilian leaders. Yes, there will be deference shown to the civilian leadership occasionally. The GHQ will try to take them along. I think the Pakistanis are deep down, they want Afghanistan not to be such that it will create ground for a large Indian presence. I think that is something that the Pakistanis very much desire, that there should not be a government which they think is under Indian influence. Now, I don't think the Afghans ever would have a government which would be under anyone's influence to a large extent, because there is a streak of independence in them. But yes, the Afghans also have an instinct of where their interests lie and to pursue those interests. So there is a question. There is this question then of with which country their interests are coinciding and which country they are diverging, and that is a process which will go on and evolve. But certainly, the Taliban, the Pakistanis, would not like the Taliban to sort of open Afghan territory for a large presence of India in any manner.
And
But
how do you see?
my last comment. But this all needs to be tested, because if I think the Taliban find that the Indian presence is in their interest, is Afghanistan's interest, I think in time, not immediately, as they grow in confidence, they will go for it. After all, It's no secret that the Republic, in its initial phase, President Karzai included, was very, very wary of India increasing its presence in Afghanistan, especially in the security sector, cooperation security sector, lest it offends Pakistan. It was only when Karzai realized that the Pakistanis were not changing in their reservations towards the Northern Alliance and towards Karzai's connection with India, even minimal connection with India, that he changed course, and then India became the first country with which
Strategic partnership.
Afghanistan had a strategic partnership agreement. That was also a signal to the Americans. You know what was the American relationship with Karzai. So that's also part of history.
How do you see China's involvement in Afghanistan, especially with the China-Pakistan nexus, the BRI, the Chinese wanting to go through Afghanistan as well? I mean, security, of course, will be an issue.
I don't see the Chinese involving themselves, certainly not through putting feet on the ground to, in Afghanistan. I think in the Chinese have interests in Afghan resources, and that they pursue. I think the Chinese are not inhibited by Taliban ideology, even though there are concerns of the Taliban relationship with the Uyghur militants. So the Chinese will follow and are following a very careful policy, but let us not forget that they're doing business with them, and that Wang Yi himself, the state concern foreign minister, was there.
Before he
Met
came
with
here.
others. Yes. So that itself was a signal. And the Russians too are doing business.
Excuse me. Ambassador, one from Matara, where is Afghanistan going to be in 2030? What is the future hold for Afghanistan?
I'll have to be an astrologer to tell you that. I think a lot depends on how the Taliban conduct themselves, how the region conducts itself. But if Afghanistan stabilizes, it will be good for everyone, good for the region. But it's a long haul, and I've learned at bitter cost that predictions about Afghanistan can be very foolhardy to make.
Especially 8 years down the line. That's quite a lot.
At that stage, I'm getting on in years. At that stage, I'll be further side.
Now, Ambassador Katju, as usual, I'll have to thank you for your experience and your expertise and sharing it with us and all our viewers on StratNews Global.
Thank you very much. It's been, as always, a pleasure talking to you, Amitabh, because I know that your interest in Afghanistan is deep and abiding, and your knowledge of Afghanistan is also very substantial. So, talking to you is like talking to someone who is knowledgeable, who knows the ground, who knows the people. So, the questions that you ask clearly show that. And thank you for having me on this show.
Pleasure's all ours. Appreciate those kind words, Ambassador. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Just a reminder to our viewers, you can help support us. We have been putting up beg your pardon, a UPI ID. It's there in the YouTube descriptor as well for you to, it's up on the screen. My producer Ankush has just put that up as well. And as soon as this stream ends, YouTube has started a new feature, which is super thanks. It's that a heart-shaped icon that you'll see right next to the thumbs up, which hopefully you've given this video. You've been watching The Gist on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.